Marcus spent the next 3 days moving toward what he hoped was friendly territory, guided only by his compass and memories of briefing maps. His physical condition was deteriorating rapidly. The infected shoulder wound had reopened during his surveillance of the prison camp, and fever made thinking difficult. Food had become critically scarce, and his attempts to hunt or forage were often unsuccessful due to his weakened state. On his 14th day alone, Marcus stumbled into a nightmare scenario. While crossing what appeared to be an empty valley, he walked directly into an enemy supply route during a convoy movement. Trucks and soldiers appeared from multiple directions, and there was no cover available in the open grassland. His heart hammered as he realized he had made a fatal mistake. The lead truck stopped, and soldiers jumped out with weapons raised. Marcus was too exhausted to run and too outnumbered to fight. He raised his hands slowly, expecting to join his captured teammates in whatever prison awaited American soldiers. At least he would see them again before the end, though he had failed in his mission to rescue them or report their location. But something unexpected happened. Instead of capturing him, the enemy soldiers seemed confused and kept looking toward the sky. Marcus heard the reason before he saw it. Helicopters were approaching from the south, flying low and fast in formation. These were not the enemy aircraft he had hidden from before. The distinctive sound told him these were American helicopters, coming in force. The enemy convoy erupted into chaos as soldiers abandoned their vehicles and scrambled for defensive positions. Marcus threw himself flat against the ground as the first helicopter opened fire with mounted machine guns. Tracer rounds lit up the early morning sky, and explosions shook the earth as rockets found their targets among the enemy vehicles. Through the noise and confusion, Marcus heard something that made his heart soar with hope. English voices were calling through loudspeakers mounted on the helicopters. They were broadcasting his name and identification number, confirming that this was indeed a rescue operation launched specifically to find him. Someone had gotten word that he was alive and operating in this area. Two of the helicopters focused on suppressing enemy resistance, while a third, larger aircraft began circling to find a landing zone. Marcus could see soldiers preparing to fast rope from the hovering aircraft, but enemy ground fire was making the approach dangerous. Several bullets struck the helicopter's hull, and one of the pilots was clearly struggling to maintain control. Marcus realized that the rescue team needed his help to complete their mission safely. Drawing on reserves of strength he did not know he possessed, he crawled toward the abandoned enemy equipment scattered around the convoy. Among the supplies, he found several grenades that had been dropped by fleeing soldiers. Using techniques learned in training but never before applied in combat, Marcus began attacking the enemy positions from behind their lines. His grenades disrupted their defensive fire just enough to allow the rescue helicopter to land safely. Navy SEALs fast roped to the ground with practiced efficiency, their advanced equipment and training quickly overwhelming the confused enemy forces. The team leader, a tough-looking petty officer with calm eyes, reached Marcus first. "Staff Sergeant Rivera? We've been looking for you for 2 weeks. Can you walk?" The concern in his voice was genuine, and Marcus felt tears of relief streaming down his face as he nodded weakly. "My team," Marcus gasped, struggling to speak clearly through his exhaustion and emotion. "They're alive. Prisoners. Taken north 2 days ago in trucks. Prison compound coordinates." He rattled off the location information he had memorized, knowing this might be the only chance to save his captured teammates. The SEAL team leader immediately relayed the information to his command through secure radio communications. While evacuation preparations continued around them, Marcus learned that his survival and intelligence were already making a difference. Rescue operations were being planned based on his reports, and satellite surveillance was being redirected to track the prisoner convoy routes he had described. As they loaded Marcus into the rescue helicopter, he caught sight of something that filled him with renewed hope. Additional helicopters were approaching from multiple directions, carrying what appeared to be a substantial rescue force. His intelligence about the prison camp and convoy routes was enabling a much larger operation to locate and free captured American soldiers. The flight back to base passed in a blur of medical attention and debriefing questions. Military doctors worked to stabilize his infected wounds and dehydration, while intelligence officers recorded every detail he could remember about enemy positions, troop movements, and prison facilities. Marcus pushed through his exhaustion to provide complete and accurate information, knowing that lives depended on the quality of his reports. Within hours of his rescue, Marcus learned that joint forces had located and intercepted the prisoner convoy. His teammates Johnson, Williams, and Rodriguez were among 17 American soldiers freed in the operation. All were alive, though they required extensive medical treatment for injuries and malnutrition suffered during captivity. The reunion with his team took place in a military hospital 3 days later. Marcus was still recovering from his ordeal, connected to 4 lines, and heavily bandaged, but he had never felt happier to see familiar faces. Johnson clasped his hand with tears in his eyes, saying simply, "You kept your promise. You found help." Marcus learned that his survival and intelligence gathering had contributed to one of the most successful prisoner rescue operations of the war. The enemy camp he had observed was completely destroyed, and the intelligence network supporting it was severely disrupted. Dozens of American soldiers who might have disappeared forever into the prison system were returned safely to friendly forces. The experience changed Marcus in ways that would affect him for the rest of his life. The 14 days alone behind enemy lines had tested every aspect of his training, courage, and determination. More importantly, it had taught him about the power of hope and the importance of never abandoning fellow soldiers, no matter how desperate the situation might appear. His commanding officer visited him during recovery and delivered news that Marcus had been recommended for the Silver Star for his actions behind enemy lines. The recommendation cited his survival under extreme conditions, valuable intelligence gathering, and direct contribution to the successful rescue of captured personnel. Marcus accepted the honor on behalf of his entire team, knowing that their survival had been a group effort from beginning to end. Months later, after recovering from his physical wounds and completing extensive debriefing sessions, Marcus returned to duty with his unit. The shared experience of survival and rescue had bonded his team more closely than ever before. They requested to serve together for the remainder of their deployment, and their commanding officers agreed that their coordination and trust made them exceptionally effective as a unit. Marcus often thought about those 14 days in the jungle, especially during quiet moments when the base was peaceful and secure. The memories were sometimes difficult, but they also reminded him of his own strength and the importance of perseverance when everything seemed hopeless. His grandfather would have been proud of how he had honored the family tradition of military service under the most challenging circumstances possible. The rescue operation became a case study used in military training programs to illustrate the importance of individual initiative and the value of every soldier's life to the military community. Marcus was invited to speak at several training facilities about survival techniques and the psychological challenges of isolation behind enemy lines. Years later, as a civilian, Marcus would occasionally receive letters from soldiers who had attended his presentations and applied his lessons during their own deployments. Knowing that his experience had helped others survive dangerous situations provided a sense of purpose that extended far beyond his own military service. The sound of helicopters never failed to bring back memories of that moment when rescue appeared on the horizon. For Marcus and his teammates, it remained a powerful reminder that no soldier is ever truly abandoned as long as others are willing to risk everything to bring them home. The brotherhood forged in combat and tested in captivity proved stronger than any enemy force they would ever face. Marcus kept the small mirror from his first aid kit as a reminder of his time behind enemy lines. Though he never needed to use it for signaling again, it served as a symbol of hope and the importance of never giving up, even when survival seemed impossible. Sometimes the smallest tools and the simplest faith could mean the difference between life and death, between coming home and disappearing forever into the darkness of war. The helicopters passed overhead without stopping, and Marcus felt his heart sink into his boots. The mirror signals had either gone unnoticed or been dismissed as sunlight reflecting off water. As the sound of rotors faded into the distance, a crushing sense of abandonment washed over him. Maybe his own forces had given up the search, declaring him missing in action or killed in the explosion that scattered his team. Marcus forced himself to keep moving. Standing still meant certain capture or death. His body had adapted somewhat to the jungle environment over the past week, but malnutrition was taking its toll. His uniform hung loose on his shrinking frame, and every physical task required tremendous effort. The infected mosquito bites on his arms and neck had developed into painful sores that refused to heal in the humid climate. Enemy patrols had increased their frequency and expanded their search patterns. Marcus found evidence of their presence everywhere. Footprints in muddy areas, broken branches where soldiers had pushed through thick vegetation, and discarded cigarette butts at rest stops. They were getting more systematic in their approach, dividing the jungle into grid sections and searching each area thoroughly. On his 10th day alone, Marcus made a disturbing discovery. While searching for a new water source, he found the crash site where one of the enemy helicopters had been forced down by American forces. The wreckage was still smoking, and scattered around the area were pieces of equipment that made his blood run cold. Among the debris, he recognized personal items that had belonged to his missing team members. A wallet belonging to Private Johnson lay open in the mud, family photos scattered and water-damaged. Sergeant Williams' distinctive watch was tangled in a piece of torn fabric that Marcus recognized as part of an American uniform. The implications were clear and horrifying. His team had been captured alive and transported in that helicopter before it was shot down. Marcus searched the wreckage more thoroughly, looking for any clues about what might have happened to his teammates. He found no bodies among the debris, which offered a small measure of hope that they might have survived the crash. However, the condition of their personal effects suggested they had been prisoners when the helicopter went down. The discovery filled Marcus with a new sense of purpose beyond mere survival. His friends might still be alive somewhere in the jungle, possibly injured and in need of help. Despite his own desperate situation, he began planning how he might locate and assist them. It was a dangerous decision that would require him to move deeper into enemy territory rather than toward potential rescue. Fresh footprints around the crash site indicated that enemy forces had already recovered any survivors and salvaged useful equipment. The tracks led north, toward an area Marcus knew contained several enemy camps and supply routes. Following those tracks would be suicidal, but abandoning his teammates felt equally impossible. Marcus compromised by shadowing the trail from a distance, using his reconnaissance training to track the movement without exposing himself. The enemy had been careless in some places, leaving clear signs of their passage through areas where they felt secure. Boot prints in stream beds, broken vegetation, and even scattered food wrappers created a trail that Marcus could follow. 2 days of careful tracking led him to the outskirts of a large enemy camp. From a concealed position on a hillside, Marcus could observe the facility through dense vegetation. The camp was much larger than intelligence reports had indicated, with multiple buildings, vehicle maintenance areas, and what appeared to be a prisoner holding facility surrounded by extra security. Through his limited view, Marcus spotted American prisoners being moved between buildings under heavy guard. The distance was too great to identify individuals, but the distinctive posture and movements convinced him these were his missing teammates. They appeared to be alive, but obviously under severe stress from their captivity. Marcus spent hours observing guard rotations, supply deliveries, and prisoner movements. The camp operated on a predictable schedule, with shift changes occurring every 6 hours, and meal deliveries to the prison compound twice daily. The security was professional but not impenetrable, especially during shift changes when guards were distracted by routine procedures. Rescuing his teammates would require resources Marcus simply did not possess. He was a single soldier with limited ammunition, no explosives, and no communication with friendly forces. Any rescue attempt would likely result in his own capture or death without helping the prisoners. The rational choice was to gather intelligence about the camp location and find a way to report it to American forces. But rational thinking became increasingly difficult as Marcus watched his friends being mistreated by their captors. During his second day of observation, he witnessed guards forcing prisoners to work in the hot sun without adequate water or rest breaks. One prisoner collapsed from heat exhaustion, and was kicked repeatedly before being dragged to a punishment cell. That evening, Marcus made a decision that went against all his training and common sense. He would attempt to make contact with the prisoners and assess the possibility of escape or rescue. If nothing else, he could provide them with hope that someone knew their location and would work to get them home. Marcus waited until the darkest part of the night before moving closer to the camp. The prison compound was separated from the main facilities by approximately 50 yards of open ground, but thick jungle vegetation extended almost to the fence line. Using techniques learned during advanced reconnaissance training, he moved inch by inch through the undergrowth. The fence around the prison compound was basic chain link topped with barbed wire, designed more to mark boundaries than prevent determined escape attempts. Guard towers were positioned at corners of the compound, but their searchlights followed predictable patterns that left brief gaps in coverage. Marcus reached the fence just as the guards completed a routine patrol of the perimeter. The prisoners were housed in a long, low building with barred windows that faced away from the main camp. Through one of the windows, Marcus could see several figures lying on crude sleeping mats in the moonlight filtering through the bars. A soft whistle, barely audible above the night sounds of the jungle, caught the attention of someone inside. A face appeared at the window, and Marcus recognized Private Johnson despite the bruises and malnutrition that had changed his appearance dramatically. Johnson's eyes widened with disbelief when he recognized Marcus crouched outside the fence. The reunion was emotional, but necessarily brief. Johnson whispered that 3 members of their original team were being held in the compound, along with several other American prisoners captured in different operations. They had been interrogated daily and forced to work on construction projects around the camp. Food was scarce, medical treatment non-existent, and several prisoners had died from untreated injuries and diseases. Marcus learned that the enemy planned to move the prisoners to a more secure facility within days. Transport vehicles had already begun arriving to prepare for the transfer. Once moved, the prisoners would likely disappear into the enemy's prison system with little chance of rescue or even acknowledgement of their fate. Johnson begged Marcus to attempt an escape plan, but the reality was sobering. The prisoners were weak from poor nutrition and harsh treatment. Multiple guards were always present, and the camp contained dozens of armed soldiers. Even if they could breach the fence and overpower the immediate guards, reaching safety through miles of hostile jungle would be nearly impossible for injured and malnourished men. Marcus promised to find a way to get word to American forces about their location and condition. Johnson provided detailed information about guard schedules, camp layout, and prisoner numbers that would be invaluable for any rescue operation. They also discussed possible signals that Marcus could use to communicate from outside the camp if help arrived. As dawn approached, Marcus reluctantly withdrew to his observation position. The brief contact with his teammate had renewed his determination, but also highlighted the desperate nature of their situation. Time was running out, and he had no way to communicate with friendly forces even if he could reach them. The next morning brought devastating news. Marcus watched as enemy soldiers began loading prisoners into covered trucks, beginning the transfer Johnson had warned about. Several prisoners were too weak to walk and had to be carried to the vehicles. Within hours, the compound was empty except for guards conducting a final sweep for forgotten items. Marcus faced an impossible choice. He could attempt to follow the convoy and continue gathering intelligence, but doing so would likely result in his own capture without helping anyone. Alternatively, he could try to escape the area and find a way to report what he had learned, but the prisoners would disappear before any rescue could be organized. As the truck convoy disappeared down a jungle road, Marcus felt the weight of failure crushing down on him. He had found his teammates only to watch them slip away again, possibly forever. The knowledge of their fate combined with his own desperate situation pushed him to the edge of despair. But even in his darkest moment, Marcus remembered his grandfather's words about never giving up while breath remained in his body. Somehow, he would find a way to survive and report what he had learned. His teammates were counting on him, and he would not let them down. The sound of helicopters in the distance reminded him that rescue was still possible, but he would need to be ready when opportunity presented itself. The morning sun barely broke through the thick jungle canopy when Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera felt his world collapse around him. The explosion came without warning, a thunderous roar that threw him 20 feet through the air and into a tangle of vines and broken branches. His ears rang like church bells, and blood trickled down his forehead as he struggled to sit up. Where was his team? The silence that followed the blast was more terrifying than the explosion itself. Just moments before, he had been walking point with his 5-man reconnaissance squad through the dense Vietnamese jungle, gathering intelligence on enemy positions. Now, as smoke cleared and his vision slowly focused, Marcus realized he was completely alone. The young soldier from Texas had enlisted 3 years earlier, driven by a sense of duty that his grandfather, a World War II veteran, had instilled in him. At 24, Marcus had already seen more combat than most soldiers twice his age. But nothing had prepared him for this moment of absolute isolation in hostile territory. His radio crackled with static. Marcus grabbed it desperately, trying to reach his commanding officer back at base camp. Alpha Base, this is Recon 7. Do you copy? The only response was white noise and the distant sound of enemy voices growing closer. The radio had been damaged in the blast, its antenna bent and sparking intermittently. Marcus quickly assessed his situation. His left shoulder ached terribly, and he could barely move his arm. His uniform was torn in several places, and his equipment was scattered around the small crater where the improvised explosive device had detonated. Of his original gear, he managed to recover only his sidearm with 2 magazines, a combat knife, a small first aid kit, and a half-empty canteen of water. The voices were getting closer now, speaking in rapid Vietnamese. Marcus knew enough of the language to understand they were searching for survivors. His heart pounded as he realized they would find his position within minutes. Despite the pain in his shoulder, he forced himself to move, crawling deeper into the jungle undergrowth. Every step was agony. The injured shoulder sent lightning bolts of pain through his body with each movement. But Marcus pushed forward. He had been trained for situations like this during his months of preparation, though the reality was far more terrifying than any training exercise. The thick humidity made breathing difficult, and sweat poured down his face as he navigated through razor-sharp elephant grass and tangled roots. Hours passed as Marcus put distance between himself and the blast site. The enemy patrol had given up their search as darkness approached, but he knew they would return with more men in the morning. He needed to find shelter and tend to his wounds before infection set in. The jungle was full of dangers beyond enemy soldiers, from venomous snakes to disease-carrying insects that could kill just as effectively as bullets. As night fell, Marcus found a small cave hidden behind a waterfall. The sound of rushing water would mask any noise he might make, and the location was defensible if discovered. Using his flashlight sparingly, he examined his shoulder wound. A piece of shrapnel had embedded itself deep in the muscle, but he managed to extract it using his combat knife. The pain was excruciating, but he bit down on a piece of leather from his boot to avoid screaming. After cleaning and bandaging the wound with supplies from his first aid kit, Marcus allowed himself a small sip of water. He had no idea how long he would need to make his meager supplies last. The sound of the waterfall was oddly comforting, reminding him of childhood camping trips with his father in the Texas Hill Country. Those peaceful memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. Sleep came in brief, restless intervals. Every sound made him reach for his weapon. Every shadow could hide an enemy soldier. Marcus had been taught that the first 72 hours were critical for survival and rescue. After that, the chances of making it home alive dropped significantly. He tried not to think about his team, hoping against hope that they had somehow survived the blast and were safe back at base. Dawn brought new challenges. Marcus's water supply was running dangerously low, and hunger gnawed at his stomach. He had eaten nothing since breakfast the previous morning, nearly 24 hours ago. The jungle offered potential food sources, but his training warned against eating anything he could not positively identify as safe. A wrong choice could leave him poisoned and helpless. Moving carefully through the dense vegetation, Marcus searched for signs of clean water. The sound of another stream led him to a small creek that appeared to flow from a clean source higher in the mountains. He filled his canteen, adding purification tablets he had found in his first aid kit. The tablets would make the water taste terrible, but they would kill most harmful bacteria. As he knelt by the stream, Marcus heard the unmistakable sound of helicopters in the distance. His heart leaped with hope until he realized they were enemy aircraft, likely searching for him or bringing reinforcements to the area. He pressed himself against the muddy bank, using reeds and fallen logs to camouflage his position. 3 helicopters passed overhead, flying in a search pattern that suggested they knew approximately where he was hiding. Marcus waited until their sound faded completely before moving again. The enemy was taking his presence in the area seriously, which meant rescue would be extremely difficult for his own forces to attempt. Days blended into nights as Marcus struggled to survive. He fashioned crude snares from wire in his equipment, managing to catch a small rabbit on his 4th day. The meat was tough and gamey, but it provided essential protein his body desperately needed. He cooked it over a tiny fire, using dry wood that would produce minimal smoke. His shoulder wound was healing slowly, but infection remained a constant threat. The humidity made everything difficult, from keeping his weapon clean to preventing his clothes from rotting away. Leeches attached themselves to his legs whenever he crossed water, and mosquito bites covered every exposed inch of skin. Despite applying insect repellent from his kit, the bugs seemed endless and aggressive. On his 6th day alone, Marcus encountered his first direct enemy contact since the explosion. While gathering edible plants he had identified as safe, he heard footsteps approaching through the underbrush. 2 enemy soldiers were conducting a patrol, moving slowly and checking every possible hiding spot. Marcus froze behind a large tree trunk, controlling his breathing and praying they would pass without detecting him. One soldier stopped less than 10 feet from his position, lighting a cigarette and talking quietly to his companion. Marcus could smell the tobacco smoke and hear every word of their conversation about the search for the missing American soldier. The minutes stretched like hours until the patrol finally moved on. Marcus waited another full hour before changing his position, knowing that enemy forces often doubled back to catch hiding targets off guard. His nerves were stretched to the breaking point, and he began to question whether rescue would ever come. Water became his most critical concern as his purification tablets ran out. He resorted to boiling water when possible, but building fires was risky and time-consuming. Dehydration began to affect his thinking, making simple decisions feel overwhelming. Marcus knew that without help soon, he would not survive much longer in the hostile environment. Hope arrived unexpectedly on his 8th day in the jungle. While moving to a new hiding spot to avoid another enemy patrol, Marcus heard a different sound in the distance. The distinctive whoop 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 of American helicopters was unmistakable, and his heart raced with excitement and fear. They could be his salvation or bring him unwanted attention from enemy forces in the area. Marcus quickly found an open area where he could signal the aircraft while maintaining some cover from ground troops. Using a small mirror from his first aid kit, he began flashing signals toward the approaching helicopters. The aircraft were still distant, but he hoped the reflection would catch someone's attention. The helicopters seemed to change course slightly, heading in his general direction. Marcus continued signaling while listening for sounds of enemy forces responding to the aircraft presence. His hands shook with exhaustion and anticipation as he reflected sunlight toward what might be his only chance at rescue.